Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories from the Appalachian forests. These are tales of people who ventured into those ancient mountains and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The cabin sat about 8 miles from any proper road, tucked into a crease in the hillside where the laurel grew so thick you could barely see daylight through it. My Uncle Dalton left it to me when he passed, along with about 40 acres of ridgeland that hadn't been logged since the 1950s. I was 29 and going through a divorce, so the timing felt almost meant to be. A place to disappear for a while, get my head straight. I drove up on a Thursday in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the whole forest had this golden quality to it that made everything look softer than it actually was. The last mile I had to walk because the old logging road had washed out years ago. My boots crunched through leaves that smelled like sweet rot, and I kept stopping to catch my breath. Not because I was out of shape, but because something about the silence made me want to pause and listen. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that sits on your chest. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered from childhood visits. One room, really, with a sleeping loft and a wood stove that Uncle Dalton had installed himself. The windows were intact, which surprised me. Most abandoned places up here get their glass broken within a season. I set my pack down and noticed the floorboards were dusty, but not as dirty as they should have been, like someone had swept recently. I told myself Uncle Dalton's lawyer probably sent someone to check on it. That made sense. I spent the first hour getting the stove going and sweeping mouse droppings out of the corners. The water pump still worked, thank God, though it took about 50 cranks before anything came out. I made instant coffee on the stove and sat on the porch steps, watching the light drain out of the sky. That's when I noticed the trees. There were marks on them, not blazes or anything official. These were scratches, I guess you'd call them. Long vertical gouges in the bark, always on the side facing the cabin. I walked over to the closest one, an old poplar about 30 feet from the porch. The marks went up higher than I could reach, 5 parallel lines scraped deep enough to show whitewood underneath. Fresh too. Sap was still seeping out. I tried to tell myself it was a bear. Bears scratch trees all the time, marking territory or whatever, but my hands were shaking when I went back inside, and I couldn't figure out why. It was just scratches. That night I lay in the sleeping loft, listening to the forest settle. Wood popping in the stove, wind moving through the eaves, normal sounds, but around midnight I heard something else. Footsteps on the porch, not boots, something heavier, more deliberate. The boards creaked in a rhythm that sounded almost like pacing, back and forth, back and forth. I held my breath, staring at the dark square of the loft opening, waiting for something to appear at the top of the ladder. The pacing stopped. Then so quiet I almost missed it, I heard breathing. Long, slow breaths right below the loft. The kind of breathing you do when you're trying to catch a scent. I didn't move until sunrise. Literally didn't move a muscle. When gray light finally started seeping through the window, I climbed down that ladder so fast I nearly fell. The cabin was empty. The door was still barred from the inside, exactly how I'd left it. But when I opened it and looked at the porch, I saw the footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They weren't boot prints either. They were long and narrow, almost like human feet, but wrong. The toes were too long, and there were only 4 of them. They circled the entire porch, overlapping in places, like whatever made them had walked around the cabin dozens of times. Some of the prints were right up against the door, right where I'd heard the breathing. I should have left then, I know that now. But I kept thinking about the lawyer, about the paperwork I'd signed, about how I'd told my ex I was going to prove I could handle things on my own, so I stayed. The second night was worse. I wedged the door shut with a chair and kept the stove burning hot so I'd have light. Around 2 a.m. I heard something on the roof. Not footsteps this time, scratching, those same long scraping sounds, but directly above the loft, moving in slow circles. Then the scratching stopped, and I heard my uncle's voice. "Tommy," it said. "Tommy, you up there?" My uncle had been dead for 3 months. I knew that. I'd been to the funeral. I'd watched them lower the casket. But that was his voice, his exact inflection, the way he used to call up to the loft when I was a kid. "Tommy, I need you to let me in. It's cold out here." I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. The voice moved around the cabin, always just on the other side of whichever wall I wasn't facing. Sometimes it sounded like my uncle. Sometimes it sounded like my ex-wife. Once, for just a moment, it sounded exactly like me. When the sun came up, I was already packed. I didn't bother checking for tracks. I just started walking. But about a quarter mile down the trail, I found something that made me stop. It was a circle of stones, maybe 6 feet across, and inside the circle were bones. Small ones, arranged in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Bird skulls, rabbit vertebrae, deer hooves still attached to strips of dried tendon. And in the center, standing upright, was a branch carved to look like a human figure. It had 4 long scratches down its face. I ran after that. Flat out ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I made it to my truck by noon and drove straight through to Asheville without stopping. Last week, I got a letter from Uncle Dalton's lawyer. Someone had been to the cabin. They'd found fresh footprints on the porch, the same strange prints I'd seen. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The letter was dated 3 days before I went up there. The lawyer wanted to warn me not to go. I never told him I'd already been. Story 2. Look, I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or any of that stuff. I work in IT, I troubleshoot servers, I deal in things that have logical explanations. But what happened to me and Brianna Kowalski on the Widows Creek Trail in October of 2019 doesn't have an explanation I can accept. Brianna and I had been dating for about 8 months, and she'd been pestering me to go hiking with her for most of that time. I kept making excuses because honestly, I'm more of an indoor person, but she finally wore me down, and we planned a weekend trip to the mountains of western North Carolina. She picked the trail, some moderately difficult loop that was supposed to have waterfall views and wasn't too crowded. We started hiking around 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Perfect weather. Mid-60s, clear sky, leaves turning red and gold. The trailhead had maybe 4 other cars, which Brianna said was ideal. Not deserted, but not packed with tourists either. She was wearing this bright orange jacket that I'd made fun of that morning. I told her she looked like a traffic cone. She said at least she wouldn't get lost. The first 2 hours were actually pretty nice. We saw a couple other hikers heading back down, traded the usual trail pleasantries. The path wound through stands of hemlock and rhododendron, following the creek uphill. Brianna kept stopping to take pictures of mushrooms and interesting rocks. I mostly just tried not to look as out of breath as I felt. Around 11:30, we reached a junction where the trail split. The main loop continued east toward the waterfall, but there was another path, less maintained, heading north. The trail marker for it was weathered almost blank, but you could just make out the words, Settler Cemetery, 0.8 mi. Brianna got excited. Oh, we should check it out. Historic sites are always cool. I wasn't enthusiastic, but she was already heading up the north path, so I followed. This trail was narrower, overgrown in places, and the trees seemed older, bigger. The kind with trunks wide enough that 3 people couldn't link hands around them. The temperature dropped too, which I figured was just because we were heading into a hollow where the sun didn't reach as well. We found the cemetery after about 20 minutes of walking. It was exactly what you'd expect from an old Appalachian burial ground. Mossy headstones tilting at angles, iron fence falling apart, a few stone markers so weathered you couldn't read them anymore. There were maybe 30 graves total, most from the 1800s based on the dates we could make out. This is so cool, Brianna said, walking between the stones with her camera out. Look at this one. Eliza Marsh, 1842-1843. God, she was just a baby. I hung back near the trail, checking my phone, no signal, which didn't surprise me. I took a picture of the cemetery entrance, more out of boredom than interest. The gate was wrought iron, rusted through in places, with the words "Rest in Peace" worked into the arch at the top. Generic, but kind of atmospheric, I guess. That's when Brianna called out, "Hey, look at this." She was crouched near the far edge of the cemetery, where the grave gave way to uncleared forest. I walked over, picking my way around headstones. She was staring at something on the ground. It was a circle of stones, maybe 4 feet across, with a wooden post planted in the center. Hanging from the post were strips of cloth, faded and torn, fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. The cloth strips had writing on them, or symbols maybe, dark brown ink that looked like it had faded over years. "That's weird," I said, which felt like an understatement. The stones weren't like the grave markers. These were field stones, uncarved, arranged too deliberately to be natural. "It's probably some local tradition," Brianna said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Like a memorial or something." We both stood there looking at it for longer than made sense. I wanted to leave, but saying that out loud felt stupid. It was just rocks and cloth, nothing scary about it. But my mouth was dry, and I kept having this intrusive thought that if I stepped inside the circle, something would happen. Not something specific, just something. Brianna took a few pictures, then straightened up. Okay, I'm creeped out now, let's head back. We retraced our steps down the narrow path. Neither of us talked much. The woods felt different now, denser, like the trees were closer than they'd been before. I kept checking over my shoulder, not because I heard anything, but because my skin felt electric, like I was being watched. About halfway back to the main trail, Brianna stopped walking. Did you hear that? I hadn't heard anything. Hear what? Someone said my name, behind us. We both turned and stared back up the path. Nothing, just trees and shadow and the soft whisper of leaves. It's probably another hiker, I said, trying to sound calm, but we hadn't seen anyone else since the trail junction. The path wasn't a loop. If someone else was up there, we would have passed them on the way to the cemetery. We kept walking, faster now, and then I heard it. Sam. My name, clear as day. A woman's voice, coming from somewhere in the trees to our right. It sounded almost like Brianna's voice, but Brianna was right in front of me and her mouth hadn't moved. Fuck this, I said. We're leaving. We started jogging, not quite running but close. The trail seemed longer than I remembered, like it was stretching out in front of us. My backpack bounced against my shoulders and I could hear Brianna's breathing getting ragged. The voice called out again. Sam, Brianna, wait. It's coming from ahead of us now, between us and the junction. Brianna grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. That's not another hiker, she whispered. We slowed down, trying to stay quiet. The path curved through a thick stand of rhododendron, the kind that forms a tunnel over the trail. As we rounded the bend, we saw it. A figure was standing in the middle of the path, maybe 60 feet ahead, right where the trail straightened out. It was tall and thin, and it wasn't moving. At first I thought it was just a person, maybe backlit in a weird way, but then I realized what was wrong with it. The proportions were off. The arms hung down past the knees, way too long, and the head was tilted at an angle that didn't look possible. It was wearing something dark, maybe clothes, but the fabric didn't move even though the wind was rustling the leaves around it. We froze. I mean completely froze. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. Figure's head rotated, not like it was turning to look at us, like it was on a swivel. The movement was smooth and continuous, turning further than any human neck could turn, until it was facing backward while its body still faced forward. Brianna made a sound I'd never heard her make before, a whimper almost. Then the thing took a step toward us. Its leg bent wrong, the knee folding in a direction knees do fold, and when its foot touched the ground, I swear the leaves around it turned black. We ran. Straight into the rhododendron, off the trail, crashing through underbrush like animals. Branches whipped my face. I lost my footing twice, caught myself, kept going. I could hear Brianna behind me sobbing as she ran. I don't know how long we ran. Minutes felt like hours. But eventually we burst out onto the main trail right near the junction marker. There were two hikers there, a middle-aged couple with hiking poles, looking at us like we'd lost our minds. Are you okay? The woman asked. What happened? I couldn't answer. I was doubled over, trying not to throw up. Brianna managed to gasp out, something on the trail, we need to leave. We didn't wait for their response. We just kept moving, practically running the remaining 2 miles back to the trailhead. When we got to the parking lot, I checked my phone. We left the cemetery at 12:15. It was now 4:47 p.m., nearly 5 hours. The hike back should have taken an hour, maybe 90 minutes with our panic detour. We lost almost 3 hours somewhere in those woods. We drove straight home without discussing it. What was there to say? But here's the thing that made me never want to go hiking again. A week later, Brianna was going through her photos from that day. She showed me the picture I'd taken at the cemetery entrance, the one of the iron gate. There was someone standing behind the gate, in the shadows, barely visible, tall and thin with arms that hung too long. And even though the photo was slightly out of focus, you could tell its head was turned at an angle that wasn't right. We'd never seen anyone else up there. The cemetery had been empty except for us. Brianna deleted the photo, but I can still see it when I close my eyes. Story 3. My grandfather's hunting cabin was built in 1962. right after he got back from his second tour. It sat on a piece of land near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, about 12 miles from the nearest town if you took the old highway. He used it every fall during deer season, and when I turned 16, he started taking me along. This was back in 2017, so I was, 22, 23 maybe. Granddad had passed the previous winter, and my grandmother asked if I'd go clear out the cabin before they sold the property. She couldn't do it herself, and my dad had no interest, so it fell to me. I drove up on a Wednesday in early November. The cabin was exactly like I remembered. Single story, rough pine walls, propane stove, kerosene lanterns, because Granddad never bothered with electricity. The whole place smelled like gun oil and old coffee. I'd packed enough food for 3 days, figuring that would be enough time to sort through everything and haul out what was worth keeping. The first day went fine. I went through his hunting gear, his clothes, boxes of old receipts and maps. Most of it was junk. I filled 4 trash bags and set them by the door. Around sunset, I made a sandwich and sat on the porch, watching the light fade out of the valley. That's when I noticed the deer stand. I'd walked past it a dozen times over the years, never really paid attention. It was about 100 yards into the woods, north of the cabin, built into a big oak tree, but something about it looked wrong now. The angle was off, or maybe the color. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I grabbed a flashlight and walked out to check. The stand was intact. Ladder, platform, even the old folding chair Granddad used to sit in, but there was something on the platform. At first, I thought it was just leaves or debris. Then I climbed up and saw what it actually was. Bones, small ones, bird skulls, squirrel jaws, what looked like the dried-out husk of a snake. They were arranged in a pattern, a spiral that started at the center of the platform and wound outward. And in the middle of the spiral was a strip of cloth, dark and stiff with something that might have been dried blood. I climbed down so fast I nearly fell off the ladder. My hands were shaking, and I kept telling myself it was just some weird hunter's ritual, something I didn't understand because I wasn't a real outdoorsman like Granddad had been. But I'd hunted with him. He'd never done anything like this. I went back to the cabin and locked the door. Which was stupid because the lock was just a sliding bolt, wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to get in. But it made me feel better. Around midnight, I heard the scratching. It started at the north wall, the one closest to the deer stand. Long, slow scrapes like fingernails on wood. Then it moved, around to the east wall. Then the south wall, circling the cabin. I sat on the bed, with the flashlight in my lap, too scared to move, listening to that methodical scratching work its way around the entire perimeter. When it reached the door, it stopped. I held my breath. 5 seconds, 10, 15, then something knocked 3 times, deliberate and slow. I didn't answer, I didn't make a sound. After a while the knocking stopped and I heard footsteps moving away through the leaves. Heavy steps, but not like boots, more like something barefoot and big. I didn't sleep. When dawn came, I packed everything I'd sorted the day before and carried it out to my truck. I was planning to leave. Just abandon the rest of the stuff and tell Grandma I couldn't do it. But when I walked around the cabin to make sure I'd locked everything, I saw the marks, scratches, all along the north wall, fresh gouges in the wood siding. They went from ground level up to about 7 feet, 5 parallel lines scraping down like something had dragged its hand along the wall. And beneath the scratches, pressed into the soft dirt, were footprints. They were human-shaped, sort of. But the toes were elongated, almost like fingers, and the heel barely made an impression, like whatever made them walked on the balls of its feet. The prints led from the cabin toward the deer stand, then disappeared into the underbrush. I should have left then. I had my truck packed, but I kept thinking about Granddad, about how he'd spent every November in these woods, and I wondered if he'd known about whatever this was, if maybe that's why he'd built the cabin where he did. So I stayed. One more night, I told myself I'd finish clearing the cabin, and then I'd leave first thing in the morning and never come back. That second night was worse. The scratching started earlier, just after sunset, but this time it wasn't alone. There were voices, multiple voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. They sounded like they were right outside the walls, moving around the cabin in a circle, chanting or singing. The rhythm was steady, hypnotic. I found myself swaying in time with it before I realized what I was doing and forced myself to stop. Then one of the voices changed. It started speaking English. "Jacob," it said, my name. "Jacob, your grandfather wants to speak with you." I knew my grandfather was dead. I knew this was some kind of trick, but the voice sounded exactly like him. The same rough drawl, the same slight whistle through the gap in his front teeth. "Jacob, open the door, I need to show you something." I put my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. The voice moved around the cabin, always just on the other side of whichever wall I was facing. "I left something for you in the stand. You need to see it. It's important." The chanting got louder. The scratching intensified, now on all four walls at once, like there were multiple things circling the cabin. I grabbed my truck keys and my flashlight and ran for the door. I didn't care anymore. I was leaving, and I was never coming back. I yanked the bolt aside and threw the door open. Nothing was there. The porch was empty. The woods were silent, but the deer stand was glowing, not like fire, like it was lit from within, a pale greenish light that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I ran to my truck and drove. I didn't stop until I was 20 miles away, pulled over at a gas station with fluorescent lights and late-night truckers, and everything normal and safe. A week later, a park ranger called my grandmother. They'd found the cabin burned down. No explanation for the fire. No lightning strikes in the area, no evidence of accelerant. The propane tank was intact, but the cabin itself had burned to the foundation. The deer stand was still standing though, untouched by the fire. They asked if I'd been burning trash when I was up there, if maybe I'd left a lantern going. I told them no. I told them I'd locked up and left, and the cabin had been fine. But I didn't tell them about the scratches, or the voices, or the glowing light. I didn't tell them what I saw in my rearview mirror as I drove away that night. Something tall standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me leave. Its arms hanging down past its knees, its head tilted at an angle that wasn't quite right. And I swear, just before I lost sight of it, it waved. Story 4. I worked as a freelance wildlife photographer, which sounds a lot more romantic than it actually is. Mostly it's sitting in uncomfortable positions for hours, waiting for something interesting to happen. But in the fall of 2018, I got a commission from a nature magazine to shoot the changing leaves in the southern Appalachians, and I figured I'd try to capture some wildlife while I was at it. I drove down from Maryland in late October, spent a few days scouting locations, and eventually found this incredible spot about 15 miles from any maintained road. A valley with this perfect little creek running through it, surrounded by ridges covered in sugar maples that had turned this brilliant red-orange. Exactly what the magazine wanted. I set up camp in the valley. Just a tent, my camera equipment, and enough dehydrated food for 4 days. The nearest cell service was back at the ranger station, which didn't bother me. I was used to working alone in remote areas. The first 2 days were productive. I got some great shots of the foliage, caught a black bear foraging near the creek, even managed a decent photo of a barred owl at dusk. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, clear skies, barely any wind. On the third night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, and that's when I noticed the trees. Every tree within 30 feet of my tent had something hanging from it. At first, in the moonlight, I thought it was just Spanish moss or maybe old streamers left by hikers. But when I turned on my headlamp, I saw what they actually were. Strips of bark, dozens of them hanging from branches by what looked like twisted grass or plant fiber. Each strip was maybe 6 inches long and an inch wide, and they'd been carved with symbols. Not letters exactly, more like pictographs or runes. They turned slowly in the breeze, casting weird shadows on the ground. I stood there in my underwear and a fleece jacket, staring at these things, trying to figure out what they meant. Some kind of art installation, but we were 15 miles from the nearest trail. Who would carry supplies all the way out here to hang bark in trees? I took a few photos with my phone, then went back into my tent. I told myself I'd investigate more in the morning, but I didn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to those bark strips rustle and click against each other, trying to convince myself it was nothing to worry about. When dawn came, the strips were gone, every single one. The branches they'd been hanging from were empty, like they'd never been there at all. I checked my phone photos to make sure I hadn't dreamed it. The pictures showed the strips clearly, symbols and all, but now they were just gone. I should have packed up right then. Instead, I made coffee and rationalized. Maybe the wind had blown them down. Maybe I'd walked past them on my way to the creek and just hadn't noticed. I was a scientist, or close enough. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't explain. That afternoon, I hiked up one of the ridges to get some elevated shots of the valley. The climb took about an hour, and when I reached a good vantage point, I set up my tripod and started shooting. The light was perfect, golden hour filtering through the trees. I was looking through my viewfinder, adjusting the focus, when I saw something moving in the valley below. At first, I thought it was a deer, but when I zoomed in, I realized it was way too big, and it was walking on two legs. It was near my campsite, tall, maybe 7 feet, with long arms and a hunched posture. It moved between the trees in this jerky, awkward way, like it wasn't used to walking upright. I watched through my telephoto lens as it approached my tent, bent down, and seemed to smell the fabric. My stomach dropped. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, stay hidden. I was at least a quarter mile away and uphill. It probably hadn't seen me. The thing circled my tent twice, then straightened up and looked directly at me. I swear to God, even at that distance, even through the camera lens, I could see it was smiling. Its mouth was too wide, and there were too many teeth, and it was smiling. I grabbed my camera and ran. Didn't bother with the tripod, didn't worry about the noise I was making. I crashed down that ridge like my life depended on it, because I was pretty sure it did. I reached my tent maybe 20 minutes later, gasping for breath, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my car keys. The tent was undisturbed. Nothing looked touched, but there was a smell, this rotten sweet odor like decaying meat and flowers, and it was so strong I gagged. I threw everything into my backpack without organizing it. Camera, clothes, food, all just stuffed in together. I didn't zip the tent, I just left it standing there and started hiking out. The trail back to my car was supposed to take 3 hours at a normal pace. I made it in 90 minutes. I didn't stop. I didn't look behind me, but about halfway back I heard footsteps, not on the trail with me. Parallel to the trail, maybe 50 feet off to the side, moving through the underbrush, keeping pace with me. When I sped up, the footsteps sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. I tried to tell myself it was just an echo or an animal, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too measured, and occasionally between the footfalls, I'd hear this sound, a clicking almost, like someone snapping their fingers but wetter. By the time I reached my car, it was almost dark. I threw my pack in the back seat and peeled out so fast I fishtailed on the gravel road. I drove straight through to the nearest town, checked into a motel, and slept with every light on. The next morning I looked through the photos on my camera. Most of them were fine. The foliage shots, the bear, the owl, but the photos I'd taken from the ridge were corrupted. Every single one showed nothing but static, like the files had been damaged. Except for one. The last photo I'd taken before I ran. It had loaded partially, just the bottom third of the image visible. And in that bottom third, you could see my tent. And standing next to it, clear as day, was that tall, hunched figure. He was looking up at the camera, looking at me, but that's not the worst part. The worst part is what I found when I unpacked my backpack at home a week later. Mixed in with my clothes was a strip of bark, maybe 6 inches long and an inch wide, carved with the same symbols I'd seen hanging in the trees that night. I'd never seen it before. I'd never packed it. It was tucked into the pocket of my jacket, the one I'd been wearing when I ran down the ridge. I threw it away immediately, took the trash straight to the dumpster. But sometimes, late at night, I still smell that rotten sweet odor, and I wonder if maybe I didn't leave everything behind in those woods after all. Story 5. The research station was supposed to be temporary, just a few months collecting data on local bat populations for a conservation grant. My partner, Elena Fuentes, and I drew the short straws and got assigned to a station in eastern Kentucky, about as far from civilization as you could get while still technically being in the United States. The station itself was actually pretty nice. A modular building with solar panels, a decent generator, 2 small bedrooms, and a kitchenette. It sat in a clearing at the edge of a state forest, surrounded by hickory and oak trees that had probably been there since before Kentucky was even a state. We arrived in early June. The weather was perfect for field work, warm but not too humid, and the bats were active. We'd head out at dusk with our equipment, record echolocation calls, check the nets, take samples. Standard stuff. Elena handled most of the data entry while I did the field recordings. Everything was fine for the first 3 weeks. We fell into a routine. Work from dusk until about 2 a.m., sleep until noon, spend the afternoon analyzing data and maintaining equipment. We were isolated, sure, but we had satellite internet in each other, so it didn't feel oppressive. Then Elena found the well. She'd been walking the perimeter of the clearing, checking for good spots to set up additional recording equipment when she stumbled across it. Literally stumbled. The well was mostly overgrown, hidden by years of vegetation and fallen leaves. It was old, probably pre-Civil War, made of stacked stones with no cover or railing. Just a dark hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet across. "We should report this," Elena said when she showed it to me. "Someone could fall in." I dropped a stone down the well and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No sound of it hitting bottom. Either it was really deep, or there was no water down there to make a splash. "Yeah," I said. "We'll email the ranger station tomorrow." We didn't though. We got busy with work and it slipped my mind. I think about that sometimes. If we'd reported it immediately, would things have been different? The noises started about a week after we found the well. At first, it was just scratching sounds at night. We figured it was raccoons or possums getting into the garbage, but the scratching wasn't near the garbage. It was on the walls of the station, moving around the outside of the building in slow circles. Elena joked that maybe the local wildlife didn't like having researchers in their territory. We installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter, thinking that would scare off whatever it was. The lights never triggered, but the scratching continued. Then one night in early July, I woke up around 3 a.m. and heard singing, not human singing. This was more like humming, but with clicks and whistles mixed in. It was coming from outside, somewhere near the well. I got up and looked out the window, and I could see a pale shape moving in the clearing. At first, I thought it was a person wearing white clothes. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized the shape was wrong. Too tall and too thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at extra joints. It was circling the well, moving in a shuffling dance, making that clicking humming sound. I should have woken Elena. Instead, I just stood there watching, unable to move. The thing circled the well maybe a dozen times, then stopped directly facing the station, facing me. Even though there was no way it could see me through the window, I knew it was looking right at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Then it smiled. Its mouth opened way too wide, splitting its face almost in half, and it smiled. I backed away from the window so fast I tripped over a chair and fell. The crash woke Elena, and by the time she came out of her room asking what happened, the clearing was empty. I told her I'd had a nightmare. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. The next day we found footprints around the well. They looked almost human but wrong. The toes were too long, and the stride was wider than any person should be able to manage, and there were marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged or pulled toward the well. Elena wanted to leave. She said we should pack up and call the university, tell them the station was compromised somehow, but I convinced her to stay. We only had 3 more weeks of data collection, and if we left early, we wouldn't get the grant money. I needed that money, we both did, that was my fault. What happened next was my fault because I made her stay. The thing came back every night after that. Sometimes we'd hear it on the roof, moving around with heavy footsteps that made the whole building shake. Sometimes we'd hear it scratching at the door, not trying to get in exactly, but just scratching, leaving marks. And always, at some point during the night, we'd hear the singing. That clicking humming sound coming from the direction of the well. Elena stopped sleeping. She'd sit up in the common room with all the lights on, watching the windows. I tried to act normal, tried to focus on the work, but I was terrified. We both were. On our last night, the night before we were scheduled to leave, Elena woke me up around 1 a.m. "It's inside," she whispered. I sat up listening. At first I didn't hear anything. Then I caught it, movement in the common room. Something sliding across the floor, heavy and wet sounding. We didn't have weapons. We had scientific equipment and a first aid kit and freeze-dried meals. Nothing that would help us fight off whatever was in the other room. Elena grabbed my hand. Her palm was slick with sweat. "We need to run," she said. "Out the back door, straight to the car." I nodded. We crept to the back door as quietly as we could, trying not to make the floorboards creak. Behind us, I could hear that sliding sound getting closer. And underneath it, that clicking humming song. We burst out the back door and ran. The car was parked about 50 yards from the station, and we covered the distance in what felt like seconds. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Elena screamed. I turned and saw it standing at the edge of the clearing, illuminated by the porch light. It was easily 8 feet tall, with skin so pale it almost glowed. Its arms hung down to its knees, and its fingers were too long, flexing and curling like it was testing the air. But the worst part was its face. It didn't have eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be, and that mouth, open in a smile that showed too many teeth arranged in too many rows. It took a step toward us, then another. I got the car door open, and we threw ourselves inside. I started the engine and floored it, tearing down the access road so fast we bottomed out twice on the rutted dirt. In the rearview mirror, I could see it standing in the road, watching us leave. It didn't chase us. It just stood there smiling until we rounded a curve and lost sight of it. We drove straight to the ranger station, got there around dawn and tried to explain what had happened. The ranger was skeptical but agreed to send someone to check the research station. They found the building empty and undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. But they did find one thing. In the common room, written on the floor in what looked like dried mud, was a message. "Thank you for waking me." We never found out what it meant. Elena quit field research entirely after that, got a job at a university lab where she never has to leave the building. I still do conservation work, but I won't take assignments in remote areas anymore. I can't, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear that clicking humming song. And I know somehow that whatever we woke up in that forest is still awake, still singing, still smiling. Story 6. My cousin Paige and I inherited a stretch of ridgeland from our Aunt Marla when she passed in the spring of 2020. About 60 acres of steep, rocky terrain in western Virginia, covered in pine and mountain laurel. Neither of us wanted it, honestly. The property was basically worthless, too remote for development and too steep for logging. But Aunt Marla's will specified that we had to visit the land at least once before we could sell it, something about respecting the family history. So in September, Paige and I drove down from Pittsburgh. We'd never been particularly close growing up. She was 4 years older than me, and we'd only really reconnected at Aunt Marla's funeral. But we figured we could manage a weekend camping trip, check out the property, and get the legal stuff sorted out. The access road was barely maintained, more like 2 ruts through the undergrowth than an actual road. We parked at the base of the ridge and hiked up, following what Aunt Marla's lawyer had assured us was a marked trail. The markers were old surveyor's tags, faded orange ribbons tied to trees, and half the time we couldn't find them. After about an hour of climbing, we reached a flat area near the top of the ridge. There was a clearing, maybe 40 feet across, ringed by enormous pine trees. In the center of the clearing was the remains of a stone foundation, all that was left of the original homestead. Just a rectangle of stacked rocks, mostly collapsed, with a few rusted pieces of farm equipment scattered around. "This is it," Paige said, sounding disappointed. I checked the GPS coordinates on my phone. "This is it." We set up our tents on opposite sides of the clearing, far enough apart that we could maintain some privacy. The plan was to spend 2 nights, document the property for the real estate listing, and hike back out Monday morning. The first night was uneventful. We made a fire, ate dehydrated chili, traded stories about Aunt Marla. She'd been kind of an eccentric, apparently. Never married, lived alone in a little house in Roanoke, and according to Paige, had been talking about the voices on the ridge for the last few years of her life. We'd all written it off as dementia. Around midnight, we put out the fire and went to our respective tents. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the hike. I woke up to Paige shaking my shoulder. "Something's wrong," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled panic. I sat up trying to clear my head. What happened?" "Listen." I listened. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual. Just normal forest sounds, wind in the trees, maybe an owl in the distance. Then I caught it, whispering, multiple voices, speaking in low tones, surrounding the clearing. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm suggested conversation, back and forth, like people having a discussion. "How many people do you think that is?" Paige whispered. "I don't know, 5, 6. We stayed in my tent, listening. The whispered conversation continued for maybe 10 minutes, then gradually faded away. When it was quiet again, Paige unzipped the tent and looked outside. "There's nobody out there," she said. We both got out and checked the clearing. Empty, our fire was dead, just gray ash. The foundation stones sat silent in the moonlight. No sign anyone had been near the camp. "Maybe it was hikers passing by," I said, knowing it sounded weak even as I said it. Hikers don't pass by at midnight on an unmarked trail. We stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire pit, not talking much. When dawn came, we were both relieved. "Okay," Paige said. "That was weird, but we are fine. One more night, and we are out of here." I wanted to leave immediately, but I didn't want to look like a coward, so I agreed. We spent the day hiking around the property, taking photos, making notes. The ridge was unremarkable. Steep slopes, rocky soil, not much wildlife. I did notice something odd though. There were no birds. I'd expected to hear songbirds, maybe see some crows or hawks, but the ridge was silent. That evening, we made a bigger fire, figuring that light and warmth might help us feel safer. We didn't discuss the whispering voices from the previous night, but they were obviously on both our minds. Around 10 p.m., the whispering started again. This time it was closer, definitely surrounding the clearing and moving. The voices would start on one side, then shift to another, like the speakers were walking in circles around us. Paige grabbed my arm. "Can you understand what they're saying?" I strained to listen. The whispers were louder now, more distinct. And then I realized something that made my blood go cold. They were speaking English. They were saying our names. Paige, Brennan, Paige, Brennan. Over and over in different voices. Some sounded male, some female, some sounded young, some old. But all of them were saying our names in this flat, emotionless tone. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." We didn't bother with the tents. We grabbed our backpacks, kicked dirt over the fire, and started down the trail with our headlamps on. The whispering followed us. It stayed about 20 feet back, keeping pace as we stumbled down the steep trail in the dark. Then the voices changed. They started saying other things. "Stop running, come back to the clearing. You can't leave. The ridge is ours." We kept going, half running, half falling down the mountainside. I lost the trail at some point, but I didn't care. I just kept heading downhill, figuring that eventually we'd reach the access road. About halfway down, Paige tripped and fell. She cried out and I turned back to help her up. That's when I saw them, shapes in the trees, pale and indistinct like figures made of mist or fog. They stood motionless between the trunks watching us. I counted at least a dozen, maybe more. They had vaguely human outlines, but no features, no faces. "Get up," I said, pulling Paige to her feet. "Get up, get up, get up." We ran. The whispering turned into something else, a sound I can't really describe. It was like dozens of voices all speaking at once, overlapping and distorted, creating this cacophony that made my ears hurt. We reached the car just as the sun was starting to rise. I'd never been so happy to see a parking lot in my life. We threw our packs in the back seat and got in, locking the doors even though that was probably pointless. The whispering had stopped. The ridge loomed above us, silent and still in the early morning light. Paige was crying. I realized I was shaking. "What the hell was that?" she said. I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We drove to the nearest town, stopped at a diner, and sat there drinking coffee until we felt human again. Then we called Aunt Marla's lawyer and told him we were donating the property to the state. We didn't care about the money. We just wanted nothing to do with that ridge ever again. The lawyer tried to argue, said we were giving up a valuable asset. We told him he was welcome to spend a night up there himself if he wanted to appraise it properly. He didn't take us up on the offer. A few weeks later, I was going through some of Aunt Marla's belongings that had been sent to me. There was a box of old journals, and I flipped through a few of them out of curiosity. One entry, dated about 2 years before she died, caught my attention. "The voices are getting louder," she'd written. I tried to tell Paige and Brennan about them, but they don't believe me. That's okay. They'll understand when they visit the ridge. The voices want to meet them. They've been waiting. I threw the journals away. I didn't want to know anything else. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up and think I hear whispering. And I wonder if maybe we brought something back with us from that ridge, something that followed us home. Story 7. I got hired to fix up a vacation cabin in the fall of 2021. The owner, some developer from Atlanta named Victor Shepard, had bought it sight unseen at an auction and wanted it renovated for rental income. He sent me photos, specs, and a key, told me to take my time and submit invoices as I went. The cabin was located in northern Georgia, way up in the mountains near the Chattahoochee National Forest. It took me 3 hours to drive there from my place in Gainesville, the last hour on increasingly bad roads. When I finally found the cabin, I understood why he'd bought it so cheap. The place was a wreck, roof sagging, porch collapsing, windows broken, but the bones were good and I've rebuilt worse. I figured 3 weeks of work, maybe 4 if I ran into structural issues. I set up a cot in the one room that still had a functional roof, brought in my tools and got started. The first few days were fine. I worked from sunrise to sunset, ripping out old insulation, replacing rotted boards, sealing the roof. Hard work, but satisfying. The nearest cell service was about 10 miles back down the mountain, but I didn't mind. I had a satellite radio for company and enough supplies to last me the full 3 weeks. I'm used to working alone in remote locations. It's kind of why I took up contracting in the first place. No boss, no coworkers, just me and the job. About a week in, I found the trapdoor. It was under a rug in the main room, covered by decades of dirt and mouse droppings. A wooden panel, maybe 3 feet square, with an iron ring set into it. I assumed it was a root cellar or crawl space, probably full of junk left by the previous owners. I pulled the trapdoor open and shined my flashlight down. It was a crawl space, all right. Dirt floor, maybe 4 feet of clearance, extending under the entire cabin. And it was full of things, not junk, things, arranged in patterns. There were rows of small stones, each one painted with a symbol or character I didn't recognize. Between the stones were strips of cloth, faded and moldy, tied in knots, and scattered throughout were bones. Animal bones, I told myself, deer skulls, raccoon vertebrae, nothing human. I didn't go down there. Something about the arrangement felt too deliberate, too purposeful, like I'd be disturbing something that didn't want to be disturbed. I closed the trapdoor, put the rug back, and told myself I'd deal with it later. Maybe I'd just seal it up, build a new floor over it, and never mention it to Victor. He didn't need to know. That night I heard the scratching. It came from under the floor, slow, rhythmic scratching like fingernails on wood. It would start in one corner, move across the length of the cabin, then stop. A few minutes later it would start again, moving in a different direction. I told myself it was rats. Old cabin, dirt crawl space, of course there were rats. I'd deal with them in the morning. But the scratching didn't sound like rats. It sounded too deliberate, too measured. Around midnight, the scratching stopped. I lay on my cot, listening to the silence, wondering if I should just pack up and leave. Tell Victor I couldn't finish the job, but I needed the money and I didn't want to look like I was scared of rats. Then I heard breathing, heavy, wet breathing coming from directly below me, like something large was lying under the floorboards, inhaling and exhaling with effort. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my cot with my hammer in my lap, staring at the floor, waiting for something to break through. Nothing did. When dawn came, the breathing stopped. I should have left then, I know that now. But in daylight, the fear seemed silly. It was an old cabin, it made noises. The breathing was probably just wind moving through the crawl space, distorted by the acoustics. I kept working. I reinforced the porch, replaced the window frames, installed new insulation in the walls. Productive work. I was making good progress. But every night the scratching came back, and the breathing, and sometimes I'd hear something else. A voice maybe, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. On the 12th night I woke up around 3 a.m. to find the trapdoor open. I knew I'd closed it. I'd put the rug back over it and stacked a box of tools on top to keep it sealed. But now the rug was pushed aside, the box moved, and the trapdoor stood open, revealing the black square of the crawl space. I grabbed my flashlight and looked down. The crawl space was empty. All the stones, the cloth, the bones gone, like someone had come in the night and cleaned everything out. That was somehow worse than finding them still there. I closed the trapdoor, put the rug back, and stacked 3 boxes on top this time. Then I wedged a chair under the door handle and sat on my cot, waiting for dawn. The scratching started around 4 a.m., but this time it wasn't under the floor. It was on the walls. All 4 walls at once, like something was circling the cabin, dragging its nails along the wood. Then the breathing came back. Louder now, right outside the door, and a voice, clear this time, speaking my name. Arlo, open the door, Arlo. It was my mother's voice, but my mother lives in Savannah, and she'd never been to this cabin in her life. Arlo, I need you to let me in. It's cold out here. I didn't move. I sat on that cot, gripping my hammer, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. The doorknob turned, slowly. The chair I'd wedged under it creaked but held. Arlo, why won't you open the door? Don't you want to see me? Voice changed. Now it was my ex-wife, then my dad, then my high school best friend who died in a car accident 10 years ago. A voice cycled through everyone I'd ever cared about, perfectly mimicking their tone and inflection. I put my hands over my ears and closed my eyes. I stayed like that until the sun came up and the voice finally stopped. When I opened my eyes, the trapdoor was open again, and something was coming up out of it. I saw a hand first, pale and thin, with fingers way too long. Then an arm, bending at angles arms shouldn't bend. Then a shoulder, streaked with dirt and something darker. I didn't wait to see the rest. I grabbed my keys and ran, burst through the door, sprinted to my truck, and drove. I didn't stop until I was back in Gainesville, shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I called Victor and told him I couldn't finish the job. Medical emergency, I said. He was pissed, threatened to withhold payment. I told him to keep the money. I just wanted nothing to do with that cabin ever again. About a month later, I got a call from a Georgia Sheriff's Department. They'd found my tools at an abandoned cabin and wanted to know if I'd been robbed. I told them no, I'd left the tools there. They could keep them or throw them out. I didn't care. The deputy paused. Sir, are you aware that cabin burned down? I was. When? About 2 weeks ago. Fire department couldn't get up there in time to save it. Burned to the foundation. I asked if they knew what caused the fire. He said no electrical wiring in the cabin, no sign of accelerant, it just burned. I thanked him and hung up. A week after that, I found something in my truck, tucked under the driver's seat, where I definitely would have noticed it before. A small stone, painted with a symbol I didn't recognize. The same kind of stone I'd seen in the crawl space. I threw it as far as I could into the woods behind my house, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice calling my name, and I wonder if maybe I didn't leave everything behind in that cabin after all. Story 8. In the summer of 2019, I was working as a field technician for a forestry survey company. Not glamorous work, but it paid okay and kept me outdoors, which I preferred to sitting in an office. My team's job was to document tree species, measure growth rates, and assess overall forest health for state conservation agencies. That July, we got assigned a tract in southeastern Ohio, right along the Kentucky border. About 200 acres of old-growth forest that hadn't been surveyed in something like 40 years. My supervisor, a woman named Rachel Winters, said it would take us about 2 weeks to complete the full survey. There were 4 of us on the team. Me, Rachel, and 2 other techs named Curtis Hayes and Lee Dryden. We set up a base camp at the forest's edge and started working our way through the tract, section by section, recording data and marking trees. The first week went smoothly. The forest was beautiful, mostly oak and hickory, with some massive specimens that had to be at least 200 years old. We worked during the day and spent evenings at camp, comparing notes and planning the next day's route. On the 8th day, Curtis found something weird. We were working in a hollow, a narrow valley with a seasonal creek running through it. Curtis had wandered about 50 yards off our main survey line, following what he thought was a rare species of fern, when he called out for us to come look. What he'd found was a clearing. Not natural, trees had been cut down deliberately, leaving a rough circle maybe 30 feet across. In the center of the clearing was a wooden structure. At first I thought it was a hunting stand, but as we got closer, I realized it was something else. It was a platform raised about 3 feet off the ground, built from logs and branches. On the platform were objects, dozens of them arranged in neat rows. There were old glass bottles, rusted tools, strips of fabric, and what looked like carved wooden figures. Everything was weathered and ancient, like it had been there for decades. "What the hell is this?" Lee said. Rachel walked around the perimeter, taking photos. "Some kind of shrine, maybe, folk tradition." "Out here," Curtis said, "we're miles from any settlement." I noticed something else. The trees surrounding the clearing all had marks on them, not natural marks. These were cuts, deliberate slashes in the bark, arranged in patterns that looked almost like writing. "We should document this and keep moving," Rachel said. "It's probably just some local custom we don't understand." We took photos and GPS coordinates, then continued our survey. But I kept thinking about that clearing, about how isolated it was, how old everything looked, and about those marks on the trees. That night at camp, things got strange. Around 10 p.m., Lee said she heard music. I didn't hear anything at first, but when I listened carefully, I caught it. Faint and distant, like someone playing a flute or pipe. The melody was simple but repetitive, going around and around in circles. Someone's camped nearby, Curtis said, but we were in the middle of 200 acres of dense forest. There were no other vehicles at the access point. We'd seen no signs of other people. The music continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. We all tried to act like it was nothing, but nobody slept well that night. The next day, we returned to the hollow to finish surveying that section. The clearing was still there, but something had changed. The objects on the platform had been rearranged. They were now positioned in a circle, all facing outward, and in the center of the circle was something new, a wooden figure, carved to look vaguely human, with long limbs and an elongated head. "Did we move these yesterday?" Lee asked. "Like, accidentally." "We hadn't. We'd been careful not to touch anything." Rachel took more photos, but her hands were shaking slightly. I could tell she was rattled, even though she was trying to stay professional. "Let's finish this section today and move to a different part of the forest tomorrow," she said. We agreed. We worked quickly, barely talking, all of us wanting to get away from that clearing. But that evening, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, heavy footsteps circling the camp. I unzipped my tent quietly and looked out. There was a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, tall and impossibly thin, silhouetted against the trees. It wasn't moving, just standing there watching the camp. I couldn't see details. It was too dark and the figure was too far away, but I could feel it watching, could feel its attention focused on us. I didn't move, I barely breathed. After what felt like an hour but was probably only a minute, the figure turned and walked back into the forest. Its movement was wrong, jerky and unnatural, like something imitating how a human walks. I didn't tell the others that night. I didn't know what to say. The next morning, Rachel found tracks around the camp. They were similar to human footprints, but elongated, with toes that splayed out unnaturally wide. The tracks circled our entire camp, passing within feet of each tent. "We are leaving," Rachel said. "Pack up, we're leaving now." None of us argued. We broke camp in under an hour and started hiking out. The trail back to our vehicles was about 3 miles, and we covered it in record time. But halfway back, Lee stopped walking. "Do you guys hear that?" she said. "The music. That same flute-like melody coming from somewhere behind us, and it was getting closer." We ran, all pretense of professionalism gone, we just ran. Curtis fell once, scraped his knee badly, but he got up and kept going. The music followed us the entire way, staying just out of sight but never quite catching up. We reached the vehicles around noon, threw our equipment in the backs of the trucks, and drove out without looking back. Rachel reported the findings to the state agency, told them we'd encountered something unusual and couldn't complete the survey. I don't know what she told them exactly, but we never got sent back to finish the job. About a month later, Curtis forwarded me an email. A hiker had gone missing in that forest. They found his campsite abandoned, all his gear still there, but no sign of him. Search and rescue looked for 3 weeks before calling it off. They found his backpack about a quarter mile from that clearing we discovered. Inside was his phone. The last photo on the phone was taken at night, a blurry image of something standing between trees, something tall and thin with long limbs and an elongated head. I don't work in forestry anymore. I got a desk job in Columbus, something boring and safe. Rachel quit too, last I heard. Curtis and Lee still work in the field, but they won't take assignments in that part of Ohio. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that music. That simple, repetitive melody going around and around. And I wonder if maybe that hiker isn't really missing. Maybe he's just somewhere in that forest, listening to the music, waiting to join whatever lives in that clearing. Story 9. My girlfriend and I broke up in March of 2020, right when everything was shutting down for the pandemic. Perfect timing, right? I was stuck in a tiny apartment in Knoxville with nowhere to go and nothing to do except think about how badly I'd screwed things up. My buddy Kevin Reyes suggested I come stay at his family's place for a few weeks. They had a cabin in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, and his parents were in Florida for the spring, so it was sitting empty. He said I could have the place to myself, clear my head, maybe do some hiking. I took him up on the offer. I loaded up my car with clothes and groceries and drove out there in late April. The cabin was about 2 hours from Knoxville, up a winding mountain road that got progressively narrower the higher I went. The place was nicer than I expected. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, even Wi-Fi, though the connection was spotty. It sat on about 5 acres of wooded hillside, with a view of the valley below, quiet, isolated, exactly what I needed. The first few days were good for me. I woke up early, made coffee, sat on the deck watching the sunrise. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. Started thinking about things other than my failed relationship. It was helping. On the fourth night, I heard something outside. I was in bed, almost asleep when I heard it. A sound like branches breaking coming from the woods behind the cabin. Then silence. Then more breaking branches, closer this time. I got up and looked out the window. The woods were dark, no moon that night. I couldn't see anything moving, but I had this overwhelming sense that something was out there. Something big. I told myself it was a bear. Tennessee has black bears and they're active in spring. Made perfect sense. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. The next morning I found the tracks. They were near the tree line, maybe 40 feet from the cabin. At first glance, they looked like bear tracks. But when I got closer, I realized they were wrong. The front prints had 5 distinct toes, way too long and separated. And the back prints were almost human-shaped, but huge. Easily twice the size of my boot print. I took photos and texted them to Kevin. What kind of animal makes tracks like this? He didn't respond for a few hours. When he finally did, his message was brief. Where did you find those? Behind the cabin, last night. Dad says to come back to town. He says you shouldn't be up there alone. I called him. What are you talking about? It's just animal tracks. Kevin was quiet for a moment. My dad's family has stories about that mountain, old stories. He never wanted to build up there, but my mom liked the view. Look, just maybe don't stay there, okay? Stories about what? Just come back to town. I didn't. I told him I was fine, that I wasn't going to let some animal tracks scare me off. But I was unsettled. Kevin's family was from the area, went back generations. If his dad was worried, maybe there was a reason. That night, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I kept the lights on. I sat on the couch with my phone, watching stupid videos, trying to stay awake. Around 2 a.m. something knocked on the door. 3 heavy knocks. Deliberate and slow, I froze. Nobody should be up here. The nearest neighbor was miles away. There was no reason for anyone to be knocking on the door at 2 a.m. The knocking came again, same rhythm, 3 slow knocks. Who is it? I called out. My voice sounded thin and scared. No answer. Just another set of knocks. I looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, nobody there, but I could hear breathing, heavy, wet breathing coming from just outside the door, like something large was standing right there just out of sight of the peephole. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, the Wi-Fi was down too. The knocking stopped. The breathing stopped. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to my own heartbeat, wondering if I should run for my car. Then I heard it at the back door. The same knocking, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Whatever it was had walked around the cabin, was circling it. The knocking moved again. Now it was at a window, then another window, moving around the entire cabin, knocking at every opening like it was testing for a way in. I grabbed a kitchen knife, which in retrospect was a stupid move. What was I going to do, fight a bear with a knife? But it made me feel marginally better. The knocking stopped around 3 a.m. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the knocking. I sat on the couch until dawn, knife in my lap, too terrified to move. When the sun came up, I packed my stuff and got ready to leave. I was done. Kevin's dad was right. I shouldn't be up here alone. But before I left, I walked around the outside of the cabin. I had to know what had been out there. I found more tracks, dozens of them circling the entire cabin. They were pressed deep into the soft earth, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. And at each window, at each door, there were marks. Long scratches in the wood like something had been testing the frame. But what made me get in my car and drive away without looking back was what I found on the front door. A handprint, not a bare paw, not a human hand. Something in between. 5 elongated fingers with distinct knuckles, pressed into the wood hard enough to leave an impression. The print was at least 10 inches wide. I drove straight back to Knoxville. I told Kevin I'd had a great time but needed to get back for work reasons. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. A few weeks later, he told me his parents had sold the cabin. They wouldn't say why, but Kevin said his dad had driven up there to check on the place and found something that made him want to sell immediately. He wouldn't tell Kevin what he'd found. Just said the cabin needed to be someone else's problem now. I never asked what it was. I didn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that handprint on the door, about those long fingers and the heavy breathing. and I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that door. I'm glad I didn't find out. Story 10. I went through a phase in college where I was really into solo backpacking. This was 2016, I think, and I'd just finished my sophomore year. I wanted to spend the summer challenging myself, testing my limits, that kind of thing. In August, I planned a 5-day trip through a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in Western Virginia. The plan was simple: start at one trailhead, hike about 12 miles a day, camp at established sites, end at a different trailhead where I'd left a second car. I started on a Tuesday morning. The weather was perfect, mid-70s and sunny. The trail was well maintained and clearly marked. I passed a few other hikers that first day, exchanged pleasantries, felt good about the trip. I made camp at the first designated site around 6 p.m. There was a fire ring, a cleared area for tents, even a bare box for food storage. I set up my tent, made dinner, hung out by the fire reading, normal camping stuff. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, and that's when I noticed something odd. The forest was completely silent. No insects, no owls, no rustling leaves, just absolute oppressive silence. I'd done enough camping to know that wasn't normal. Forests are never truly quiet. There's always something making noise, but this was like being in a soundproof room. I finished quickly and got back in my tent, feeling unsettled. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to that silence, until I finally fell back asleep. The next day, I hiked to the second designated campsite. 12 miles, moderate elevation gain, nothing too challenging. I saw no other hikers, which was a little unusual for August, but not unheard of. This was a less popular section of the trail. I set up camp, made dinner, and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest still felt too quiet, and I kept having this sense that I was being watched. Around 10 p.m. I heard footsteps, not on the trail, in the woods around my campsite, heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush in a slow circle. Grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the sound, but I couldn't see anything, just trees and darkness. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. I sat by my fire, too nervous to go to sleep, wondering if I should just pack up and hike out in the dark. But that was crazy. It was probably just a deer or another hiker, nothing to worry about. I forced myself to go to bed around midnight. I left the rain fly off my tent so I could see outside if anything happened. And I kept the flashlight in my hand. Around 2 a.m. I woke up to see something standing at the edge of my campsite. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and thin, so thin it looked almost skeletal. It stood between two trees, completely motionless, facing my tent. I couldn't see details. It was too dark and the thing was just a silhouette. But I could see the outline of its body, the way its arms hung down past its knees, the strange tilt of its head. I didn't move, I barely breathed. I just lay there staring at it, praying it would go away. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, it turned and walked back into the forest. Its movement was wrong, too smooth and flowing, like it was gliding rather than walking. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When dawn came, I packed up my tent and started hiking. I didn't care about the plan anymore. I just wanted to get off this trail. But here's where things got really wrong. I hiked for 6 hours. 6 solid hours of steady walking, following the trail markers, maintaining a good pace. I should have covered at least 15 miles, should have reached the next trailhead or at least a road crossing. But around 2 p.m. I came around a bend and saw something that made my stomach drop. I was back at the same campsite, the one I'd left that morning. I recognized the fire ring, the clearing, the specific configuration of trees. This was definitely the same spot. I'd been walking steadily on the trail the whole time. I followed the blazes. I hadn't gone in circles. I checked my map and compass. According to them, I was miles away from that campsite, but I was standing right in front of it. I started hiking again, faster this time, almost jogging. I followed the trail blazes religiously, checking my compass every few minutes. I hiked until sunset, my legs screaming, my lungs burning, and I ended up back at the same campsite. I broke down then. Just sat on the ground and cried. I didn't understand what was happening. The trail was linear. I was following it correctly, but somehow I kept ending up in the same place. I tried one more time. I hiked through the night using my flashlight, ignoring my exhaustion. I walked for 8 hours straight, and at dawn I was back at the campsite. That's when I saw the figure again, standing in the exact same spot between those two trees, just watching me. I screamed at it. "What do you want? What are you doing to me?" It didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, tilted head and long arms, watching. I don't remember making the decision to leave the trail, But at some point I just started running straight through the forest, abandoning the trail entirely. I crashed through underbrush, fell down slopes, got scratched and cut and bruised. I didn't care, I just ran. I ran until I came to a road. A paved, normal road with power lines and mile markers. I stood on that road, sobbing with relief, barely believing it was real. A car stopped. An older couple asking if I was okay. I must have looked insane, covered in dirt and blood, wild-eyed. They gave me water and drove me to the nearest town. I called a friend to come pick me up and I went home. I left my car at that second trailhead. Never went back for it. Reported it stolen, bought a new one. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted nothing to do with that trail ever again. Here's the part I've never told anyone. When I got home and unpacked my backpack, I found something that wasn't mine. A small wooden figure, carved to look vaguely human with long arms and a tilted head. It was tucked into a side pocket I never used. I threw it away immediately, but every few months I find it again, in my car, in my apartment, in my coat pocket. Always the same figure, always appearing in places I've already checked a dozen times. I've tried burning it, burying it, throwing it in a dumpster across town. It always comes back, and sometimes late at night, I see that silhouette at my window, tall and thin, with arms that hang too long, watching me with that strange tilted head. I think part of me is still on that trail, still walking in circles, still trying to find a way out, and I don't think I ever will. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.